So this is how you repay the family that fed you. The newspaper hit the flour-dusted counter of the Gull's Nest before Nora Bell had finished tying her apron, and the photograph on the front page looked up at her like a stranger wearing her face. There she was, in gray newsprint, her own mouth pressed to Elliot Ashford's, the two of them wrapped together at the end of the moonlit pier. The marina lanterns smearing gold behind them. "The heir and the baker's girl," the headline said, and beneath it, in smaller letters that somehow shouted louder, "A Summer Scandal Rocks, Marrow Cove." Vivienne Ashford stood in the doorway in cream linen and cold pearls, and she did not raise her voice, because women like Vivienne never had to. "You will pack whatever is yours," she said, "and you will be gone before the season ends." The bell above the door was still trembling. The kettle Nora had set to boil began to whistle behind her, thin and useless, and she did not move to take it off. 3 weeks. That was all it had been. 3 weeks, 1 kiss, and a photograph that neither of them had known was being taken. And now everything Nora's aunt had built with cracked hands and burnt sugar over 30 summers was balanced on the edge of a woman's manicured verdict. What Vivienne did not know, what nobody in Marrow Cove knew yet, was who had truly stood in the dark that night with a camera, and why. But to understand how a baker ended up kissing the most guarded man on the coast, you have to go back to the first morning of June before any of it, when the town smelled of salt and warm dough, and Nora Bell still believed that summer was just a season and not a thing that could break a person clean in half. That morning, the fog came in off the water the way it always did, soft as spilled milk, and Nora unlocked the Gull's Nest at 5 the way her aunt had taught her. The little bakery sat crooked at the elbow of Harbor Street, blue paint peeling at the sills, a gull weather vane on the roof that had not pointed true north since before Nora was born. Inside it smelled of yeast and cardamom and the faint smoke ghost of 40,000 loaves. She lit the ovens by feel. She measured flour into the dented tin bowl without weighing it, because her hands already knew. "You're humming again," said Bertie, coming in from the back with a tray of proving rolls balanced on one hip. Bertie was 70 if she was a day, small and knotted as a piece of driftwood, and she had worked this counter since Nora's aunt first opened it. "You only hum when you're worried about money." "I'm not worried about money. You're humming a funeral march, love. It's a lullaby." "It's the same 3 notes you hummed the week the fridge went out." Bertie set the tray down and eyed her over the rims of her glasses. How bad. Nora slid the ledger an inch under a bag of sugar, which was as good as a confession. The bank sent another letter. And I put it with the others. She wiped her hands down her apron, leaving 2 pale prints. The Ashford Grand renewed their standing order this morning. 200 rolls a week for the guest breakfasts. That keeps the lights on. "The Ashford Grand," Bertie repeated, and there was a whole weather system in the way she said it. "So we're feeding the family that's been trying to buy this whole street out from under us since Christmas. We're feeding their guests." Nora reached past her for the long peel. "Their money spends the same as anyone's." That was the thing about Marrow Cove that summer people never quite understood. Half the town belonged, in one way or another, to the Ashfords, the grand hotel on the bluff, with its white columns and its lawns rolling down to the water, the marina, the yacht club, the good half of Harbor Street. The other half belonged to people like Nora, who baked for the first half and smiled and made change and pretended not to see the surveyors with their little orange flags creeping closer every year. The bakery was the last stubborn tooth in a mouth the Ashfords very much wanted to fill with something more profitable. By 7:30, the fog had burned off gold, and the first customers came, fishermen with salt in their beards, a nurse coming off the night shift, the summer renters in their pressed shorts asking whether the almond croissants were gluten-free. Nora knew them all by their orders. She knew Mr. Pell took his coffee so weak it was practically a rumor. She knew the widow Astor liked the ends of the loaf where the crust went dark. It was a small life and a flowery one, and most days it fit her like a favorite sweater, worn thin at the elbows, but warm. Most days she did not let herself notice the quiet of the flat above the shop, or the second cup she still sometimes reached for out of habit and put back. At 7:50, a man she did not know pushed open the door hard enough to make the bell shriek, and everything about him was wrong for the room. He wore a charcoal suit that had never once seen sand. His shoes were the kind that cost more than her oven. He stood in the doorway of her small warm shop like a man who had walked into the wrong life by mistake and was deciding whether to be angry about it. "Are you the owner?" he said. "Not a question, exactly," a demand, wearing a question's coat. "I'm the one holding the bread," Nora said. "That's usually close enough. What can I get you?" The Grand's delivery this morning was short 40 rolls. He set a receipt on the counter and squared it with one finger until it was perfectly parallel to the edge. The kitchen counted. 40. My mother does not run a hotel that serves apologies for breakfast. So, this was one of them. Nora had heard the sun was back, had heard it the way you hear weather coming, from 3 different people before it arrived. Elliot Ashford, home after years of running the family's affairs in cities where the sea was something you saw from a window. He was younger than she'd pictured, and colder, with dark hair pushed back from a face that would have been handsome if it ever once stopped calculating. His jaw was tight. There was a small muscle working near his temple, the look of a man doing sums he did not enjoy. 40 rolls, Nora said slowly. You came down here yourself, over 40 rolls. I came down because the account is significant and the error is repeated. This is the 3rd short delivery in 2 weeks. It's the first I've heard of any of them. Then perhaps you should count. The nurse at the corner table went very still over her coffee. Bertie, by the ovens, made a sound like a kettle deciding whether to boil. Nora set down the loaf. She kept her voice even, because her aunt had always said, "You never let the good customers see you bleed, and you never let the rude ones see you flinch." "Mr. Ashford." "It is Mr. Ashford, isn't it?" "The Grand's order goes out at 5, boxed and sealed and signed for by your own night porter. If it's short by the time it reaches the kitchen, then somewhere between my counter and your chef, 40 rolls learn to walk. I'd start with the porter, or with whoever on your staff likes a warm breakfast on the way to work." Color moved up the side of his throat. "You're accusing my people of theft. I'm accusing 40 rolls of not evaporating." She smiled, and it was a real smile, which she suspected annoyed him more than shouting would have. Here, she reached into the case, bagged 4 fresh rolls still warm enough to fog the paper, and set them beside his precious receipt. "On the house. Count these. If they make it up the hill, we'll know the fog's not eating them." For a moment he only looked at her, and something flickered behind the cold, surprise, maybe, that the baker's girl had teeth. Then he picked up the bag, because a man raised the way he'd been raised could not stand to leave a thing on a counter, and the warmth of the bread seemed to genuinely confuse him, as though he'd forgotten that food came from anywhere but silver trays. "I'll expect an accurate count tomorrow," he said. "You'll get an honest one. It's the only kind I keep." The bell shrieked again on his way out. Through the window, Nora watched him pause on the pavement, look down at the humble paper bag in his manicured hand, and she could have sworn not know what to do with it. Then he walked up the hill toward the white columns, and she let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "Well," said Bertie into the quiet, "he'll be trouble. That's a man who irons his own sadness. He's a man who's short 40 rolls." Bertie went back to her tray. So was every Ashford who ever came down this hill love short something. They just never can figure out what. Nora meant to forget him. She was good at forgetting the ones who made her small. She'd had practice. But that evening, an hour after she'd flipped the sign, a knock came at the locked door, soft, almost apologetic. So unlike the morning's shriek that she nearly didn't connect the two. Elliot Ashford stood in the last gold light with his tie loosened and his jacket over his arm, and he looked, in the dusk, less like a verdict and more like a man who had lost an argument with himself the whole way down the hill. "We're closed," Nora said through the glass. "I know." He held up something. Squinted, the porter. She unlocked the door. "The porter what?" "You were right about the porter." The words came out of him like they cost money. "He's been taking a box every few days, selling them to the coffee cart by the ferry. My mother wanted to have him removed on the spot, but he has 3 grandchildren and a wife who he stopped, as if he'd said more than the situation permitted. I moved him to the maintenance staff instead. It seemed proportionate." Nora leaned in the doorway. The evening smelled of low tide and warm tar, and the honeysuckle going wild over the fence next door. "And you came all the way back down to tell me this?" Because I accused you." A muscle in his jaw again. "In your own establishment. In front of your customers." That was, he seemed to search for a word that would not require him to feel anything. "Discourteous, discourteous," Nora repeated, and she couldn't help it. The laugh got out of her. "That's a very expensive word for sorry." He blinked. Nobody, she suspected, laughed at Elliot Ashford. "I don't know what you find funny." "You, a little. You came down a whole hill to apologize without using the word." She stepped back and held the door. "Come in, then. I've got tea already made, and it's going to waste, and I can't abide waste. Ask anyone." He hesitated on the threshold the way he'd hesitated over the paper bag that morning, a man unsure whether a warm thing was a trap. Then he came in, ducking slightly though the door was tall enough, and the little bakery took him in the way it took everyone, wrapping him in yeast warmth and the last heat off the cooling ovens and the sweet ghost of the day's baking. "It smells like," he started, and stopped. "Like what?" Nothing. He set his jacket over a chair with great care. "It's been a long time since I was in a room that smelled of anything but lilies. My mother has them delivered. Tuesdays and Fridays. That's the saddest thing I've heard all week, and I read the bank's letters." Nora poured. 2 cups. The second one she pushed across the little marble table where, in the mornings, old men argued about tides. "Sit. You're making the room nervous, standing like that." And to her genuine surprise, the most guarded man on the coast pulled out a chair in a closing bakery and sat down. And the summer, though neither of them could have named it yet, tilted quietly on its hinge and began, slow and warm and utterly without permission, to slide. They talked longer than either intended. Not about anything, really, about the town. About the way the fog came in. He asked stiffly what the ledger under the sugar bag was, and she told him the truth because she was too tired to dress it up. That the Gull's Nest was a season, maybe 2, from closing, and that his mother's surveyors had a way of showing up whenever a payment came due, as if they could smell it. "She's not cruel," Elliot said, turning his cup a precise quarter turn on its saucer. "My mother. People think she is. She's, efficient. She sees a street, and she sees what it could earn. And she cannot see why anyone would keep a thing that loses money for the sake of the way it smells. And you? Nora asked. What do you see? He was quiet a long moment. Outside, a gull complained at the moon. I was taught to see the same things she does, he said finally. I'm good at it. I'm very good at it. He looked at the pale flower print her hand had left on her apron. Then at the crooked shelves, the gull weathervane's shadow long across the floor. I don't know what I see when no one's grading me. I haven't tested it in some time. It was, Nora would think later, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in a year, and he'd said it like a man confessing to a small crime. She did not fall for him that night. She wanted to be clear with herself about that. Afterward, when it mattered. That night she only refilled his cup and told him he was welcome to argue about tides with the old men any morning he liked. And he'd said, with the ghost of something that in a warmer man might have been a smile, that he would consider it. Then he'd gone back up the hill, and she'd washed 2 cups instead of 1, and told herself the flutter under her ribs was only the relief of a debt half paid. But he came back. That was the trouble. He came back the next morning at 10 to 8. And he counted his own rolls at the counter like a penance, and the morning after that he came at 7 and stayed for the tide argument, sitting stiff and silent in the corner while old Silas Doran leaned his ash cane with the curved bone handle against the counter, and fought with Mr. Pell and the widow Astor about the moon, and slowly, over rolls, over tea. Over the small weather of ordinary days, the ice on the man began, in places, to thaw. The town noticed. Of course it did. In Marrow Cove, a secret lasted about as long as ice cream on the pier. He's down at the bakery again. Nora heard the widow Astor whisper to her sister over the peaches, not troubling much to lower her voice. 3rd time this week, and him practically engaged to the Lindvist girl. Practically engaged. The words landed in Nora's chest like a dropped tray. She kept slicing bread. She did not ask. But that night when Elliot came by after closing, it had become a thing, this after-hours cup. Without either of them ever agreeing to it, she set his tea down harder than she meant to. They say you're getting married, she said. Not a question. She'd learned that from him. He went very still. Who says? The peaches. The pier. Everyone but you. She sat across from him and made herself meet his eyes. Are you? For a moment he looked like a man watching a wave he'd seen coming and decided too late to outrun. There's an arrangement, he said carefully, between my mother and the Lindvists. Their marina and ours joined. It would double the family's holdings on the coast. Astrid understands it for what it is. So do I. An arrangement. Nora turned her cup a quarter turn, mocking him gently, and was rewarded by the flush along his throat. You people, you'd merge a marriage like 2 accounts. It's how it's done. In my family, it's how it's always been done. But his voice had lost its edge, and he was not looking at her the way a promised man ought to look at a baker in a closing shop. He was looking at her the way the tide looks at the shore, like a thing pulled, against all sense, towards something it was never meant to reach. It has nothing to do with what? With this, he said, very low, and gestured at the 2 cups, the warm, dark room. The small, stubborn, ordinary happiness of it, as if this were a country he had discovered by accident and did not know how to declare. With whatever this is. Nora's heart was going like a bird against a window. She should have said something wise. She should have sent him up the hill. Instead, she said, foolishly, honestly, you should go home, Elliot. And neither of them moved a single inch. And the honeysuckle poured its sweetness in through the cracked window, and the summer held its breath. He went home. But it was too late by then, and they both knew it, and knowing it was its own kind of ruin. The night it finally broke was the night of the Grand's midsummer gala, the great white party on the bluff that the whole town watched from below like a lit ship. Lanterns strung through the marina, a band on the lawn, the Ashfords and their guests in linen and silk gliding across the grass, while down at the water, the ordinary people of Marrow Cove sat on the seawall with paper cups and pretended not to envy the light. Nora had catered the bread, nothing more, trays of it carried up the hill and left at the service door. She had not meant to stay. But the evening was warm, and the music drifted down soft over the water, and she'd walked out to the far end of the marina pier where the lanterns thinned, just to feel the night on her face for a minute before the long walk home. That was where he found her. Of course it was. "You came," Elliot said behind her, and there was something undone in his voice, some thread finally pulled loose. He'd left the party. She could hear it in the way the band's music sounded distant now, and in the champagne and salt smell of him when he stopped close. He'd taken off his jacket. His collar was open. In the lantern light he looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like a man who had stopped doing sums. "I brought your bread," Nora said. "That's all. I'm not. I don't belong up there. Neither do I." He laughed, low and surprised, like the sound had escaped without his say-so. "I've been standing in that light for 2 hours, Nora, shaking hands, and the entire time I've been thinking about a crooked bakery that smells like cardamom. And I could not for the life of me tell you why the smell of your shop feels more like home than a house my family has owned for 100 years." The water moved black and gold beneath the pier. A lantern swung. Somewhere far off the band turned over into something slow. "Don't," she whispered. "You're promised. There are surveyors with orange flags who'd love a reason. Your mother. I know exactly what my mother is." He was very close now. She could see the pulse at his throat, quick as her own. "I have spent 33 years being what she needs me to be. And I came out here to tell you that I can't sit in your shop one more evening pretending I only came for the tea. Elliot, tell me to go, and I'll go. Say the word, and I'll walk back up that hill and marry the marina and never trouble you again." His voice dropped to almost nothing, almost lost under the water and the far-off band. "But you have to say it." "Because I can't." And Nora Bell, who had told herself 100 careful times over 3 weeks that she would never, that she could not, that a baker and an heir was a story that only ever ended one way, Nora looked up at him in the swinging lantern light with the whole warm summer pressing at her back, and she did not say the word. She never got the chance to decide whether she would have. Because he kissed her, or she kissed him, they would never afterward agree which, and it hardly mattered. And the marina lanterns burned gold behind them, and the music rolled slow across the water, and for one clean, wordless moment the town and the family and the surveyors and the whole crushing weight of who belonged where simply fell away. And there was only the two of them at the end of a summer pier. Mouths and hands and the reckless hammer of 2 hearts that should have known better. Neither of them heard the click. Neither of them saw the small dark shape at the shore end of the pier, crouched behind a stack of lobster creels, or the pale wink of a lens catching lantern light. Neither of them knew, in that moment, that the most private thing they had ever done had just become the most public. They broke apart, breathless. Elliot pressed his forehead to hers. "There," he said, shaken, wondering, "Now tell me to go." Nora opened her mouth. Down the pier, A lobster creel scraped stone, a small wrong sound in the wide, soft night, and she turned toward it, but there was nothing there now, only the dark and the swinging lanterns and the long empty boards running back toward the light and the party and the life that would, by morning, know exactly what she had done. Someone was there, she breathed. There's no one. But he'd gone still, listening, and up on the bluff the band had stopped, and a different sound was rising through the summer dark, voices, a ripple of them, moving the way news moves, fast and low and hungry, and neither Nora Bell nor Elliot Ashford yet understood that the click they hadn't heard had already changed everything, and that the longest walk of their lives would be the one back up the hill toward the light, into the morning that was coming for them both. The walk back up the pier was the longest quiet of Nora's life. The boards were still warm under her thin shoes from a day of sun, and the lanterns swung on their wires with a small creak, 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 that seemed suddenly to be counting something. Elliot's hand found hers between two pools of light, and she let it, because it was already too late to pretend she wouldn't have. "You heard it too," she said. The creel. Someone knocked a creel. A cat. The marina's full of them. But his voice had the careful flatness of a man reassuring himself in someone else's voice. He stopped where the pier met the shore, in the last dark before the party's spill of gold, and turned her to face him. Up close he smelled of salt and warm linen and the faint green of crushed grass from the lawn. "Nora, look at me. Whatever this costs, I'm not sorry. Do you understand? I have been sorry about a great many things for 33 years. This is not one of them. You should be sorry." Her heart was still going hard against her ribs. "You're the one with something to lose. So are you." His thumb moved once across her knuckles, the way it moved a quarter turn across a teacup. "The shop. I know." "Then let go of my hand where the lights can see us." He looked up the hill toward the white columns and the band, and for a moment she watched the sums come back into his face. The old careful arithmetic reassembling itself piece by piece, and she hated it and she understood it in the same breath. He let go of her hand. It was the right thing, and it felt like a small door closing. "Go home the low road," he said. "By the sea wall, not the front lawn. I know how to be invisible in this town, Elliot. I've had years of practice. Something crossed his face at that, quick as a fish under water. You were never invisible to me. Don't." She stepped back before the word could do to her what it wanted to. The honeysuckle over the marina fence was pouring its sweetness into the dark thick as syrup, and somewhere a halyard tapped its mast. Tap, tap, tap. A small, patient sound. "Go back to your party. Shake your hands. I'll bring the morning bread at 5 like I always do, and this will be a thing that happened once, in the dark, that nobody has to know." She believed it, saying it. That was the terrible part. For one more minute, standing in the honeysuckle dark, with the band turning over into something slow. Nora Bell still believed a secret could stay a secret in Marrow Cove. Then she walked the low road home along the sea-wall, past the fishermen mending nets by lantern, past the widow Astor's dark windows, and she did not see, because she was looking at the water and thinking of his thumb across her knuckles, the figure that peeled away from the lobster creels behind her and went up the hill the fast way. Ahead of her, carrying something small and square, held very carefully against the damp. Up on the lawn the party had not stopped. Elliot came back into the light with his collar buttoned and his jacket back on, and the change of costume felt like a lie he was wearing on the outside. The band played. Waiters moved through the linen crowd with trays of chilled glasses that caught the lantern light and threw it back gold. His mother stood near the balustrade in cream and cold pearls, holding court over the harbor master and two men from the county planning office, and even from across the lawn Elliot could read the shape of the conversation by the tilt of her head. Orange flags. Frontage. What a street could earn. "You disappeared," said Astrid Lindqvist, arriving at his elbow with two glasses and the easy authority of a woman who had been told since birth that rooms belonged to her. She was tall and pale gold and genuinely clever, and Elliot had never once been able to dislike her, which had always seemed to him the cruelest part of the arrangement. For 40 minutes, Marsh covered by telling everyone you were on a call to Zurich. You should thank him. Nobody calls Zurich at a midsummer gala, but nobody was rude enough to say so. Astrid, Elliot, she handed him a glass he did not want and studied him over the rim of her own. Her eyes were not unkind. That was the trouble with Astrid. Nothing about her was unkind. You have grass on your knee and salt on your collar, and you are looking at the marina like it did something to you. A pause, delicate as a scalpel. She's the one who bakes, isn't she? The one you keep going down the hill for. The lawn seemed to go very quiet, though the band played on. There's nothing to. Please don't. She said it gently. I've known you since we were children throwing shells off my father's dock. Don't insult us both by counting it out for me like an invoice. She turned to look at the water too, the two of them side by side at the balustrade like a promised couple, which to every eye on that lawn was exactly what they were. I don't want the marriage either, you know. I want the marina. You want, her mouth curved, not quite a smile, whatever smells like cardamom. Our mothers want the map of this coast redrawn in one color. 3 different wants, 1 wedding. It's almost funny. It isn't funny. No, Astrid agreed. It isn't. And it's about to be a great deal less funny, because whatever you did down at that pier, you did it under 200 lanterns. And this town would trade its own grandmother for a story. She set her untouched glass on the balustrade. Fix it tonight, Elliot, whatever it is. Because my mother has already spent this coast in her head, and your mother has spent it twice, and neither of them will let one baker stand between them and the deed. She walked back into the light, gracious, luminous, already laughing at something the harbor master said, and Elliot stood at the balustrade with a glass he did not drink and understood too late that Astrid Lindqvist had just done him the last kindness she would be permitted to do. Down the hill, the Gull's Nest opened at 5 the next morning, the way it always had. Nora had not slept. She had lain in the flat above the shop listening to the gulls come awake and turning the night over and over, his thumb on her knuckles, the creel scraping stone, the word invisible. And at 4 she had given up and gone down to the ovens, because her hands wanted work her mind couldn't give them. She lit the ovens by feel. She measured flour into the dented tin bowl. She hummed without noticing. 3 notes, said Bertie, coming in from the back with her coat still on and her face doing something Nora had never seen it do. You're humming the fridge song, love, and it's not the fridge. I'm fine, Bertie. You're not. Bertie set a folded newspaper on the flour-dusted counter, very gently, the way you'd set down something that might go off. Deacon dropped it through the door 20 minutes ago and wouldn't stay to be thanked. That boy's got no cruelty in him. He just didn't want you to hear it from a stranger. Nora looked down. The photograph on the front page looked up at her like a stranger wearing her face. There she was, in gray newsprint, her own mouth pressed to Elliot Ashford's. The two of them wrapped together at the end of the moonlit pier, the marina lanterns smearing gold behind them. The heir and the baker's girl, the headline said, and beneath it, in smaller letters that somehow shouted louder, "A summer scandal rocks Marrow Cove." The kettle she'd set to boil began to whistle behind her, thin and rising, and she did not move to take it off. "Whoever took that," Bertie said quietly, "was lying in the creels the whole while. That's not a lucky snap from the lawn, love, look at the angle. Somebody was down at the water, close, waiting. Somebody knew you'd be there before you did. Nobody knew. I didn't know myself until I was standing on it. Somebody knew." Bertie reached past her and lifted the shrieking kettle off the flame. And the sudden quiet was worse than the whistle. You listen to old Bertie. There's a thing in this that's crooked deeper than a stolen kiss, and if I were you, I'd want to know who was crouched in those creels a long time before I worried what her ladyship up the hill thinks of me. But there was no time to want anything, because the bell above the door had begun to ring, not customers. Nora realized, but the first of the looks, the summer renters slowing on the pavement to point. The widow Astor's sister, already halfway across the street with the paper folded to the picture, and behind them all, gliding up Harbor Street in cream linen with the certainty of weather, came Vivienne Ashford. She did not hurry. Women like Vivienne never had to. She stepped into the little warm shop, and the bell trembled over her head, and she looked at the ovens and the crooked shelves and the gull Weathervane's shadow with the mild, itemizing distaste of a woman pricing a thing for demolition, and then she looked at the newspaper on the counter, and then at Nora. "So this is how you repay the family that fed you," she said. Nora had not finished tying her apron. Her hands went still at the strings. Mrs. Ashford, 200 rolls a week. Vivienne's voice was soft and even, and it carried to every corner of the silenced room. "For 3 years. When your fridge broke, whose kitchen sent down ice? When the winter storm took your roof tiles, whose men came with ladders and asked for nothing? I did not do those things out of love, Miss Bell. I did them because a well-run town is a profitable one, and I do not let good frontage rot for want of a favor." She set one gloved finger on the newspaper and turned it a precise 1/4 inch, so the photograph faced Nora squarely. "And this is the return on my investment." "That's not." Nora's throat was dry as flour. "Whatever you think happened, I think a photograph happened," Vivienne said. "I have spent 30 years learning that what happened matters a great deal less than what can be printed." She lifted her finger from the paper. "You will pack whatever is yours, and you will be gone before the season ends. Not because of a kiss. Kisses are cheap. I've buried 100. Because you have made my son a headline 3 weeks before I close the largest arrangement of my life, and I cannot afford you, Miss Bell, at any price. The lease on this building comes up in September. It will not be renewed." The whole shop had stopped breathing. Somewhere at the back, Bertie made a low sound, and for once had nothing wry to spend. "The lease is my aunt's," Nora heard herself say. "Your aunt is gone, and you signed her name," Vivienne said, not unkindly, which was somehow the worst of all, "and the freeholder is a company, and I own a great deal of that company. I did not want to be a woman who does this over a bakery. You made me one." She drew on her composure like a second glove. "Be gone before the season ends, and I will see the transition is generous. Fight me, and I will see that you leave this coast with nothing but flour on your hands. I trust I have been clear." She turned to go. The bell was already trembling for her exit when Nora, who had been made small by better people than Vivienne Ashford and had learned exactly how much of herself to keep back for a moment like this one, said, in a voice that did not shake, "You keep saying you fed me." Vivienne paused, one hand on the door. "You never fed me, Mrs. Ashford. You bought my bread and paid the bill." Nora untied her apron at last, slowly, and folded it over her arm, and stood very straight in her flower-printed dress. I fed you. 200 rolls a week, at 5 in the morning, in the fog, while your guests slept in beds I'll never see. Whatever else is true today, that one's on the receipts. For a single held second, something moved behind the cold in Vivienne's eyes, not warmth. Nothing so soft, but the flicker of a woman recalculating a sum she'd thought was finished. Then it was gone. Before the season ends, she said, and the bell shrieked once behind her, and she was gone up the hill, and the shop breathed out all at once like a held lung. Well, said Bertie into the ringing quiet, small and fierce, there's my girl. Your aunt's very daughter, flower and iron both. She came and put one knotted hand on Nora's wrist. Now, we are going to make the morning bread, because the ovens are hot, and grief is best worked with the hands, and then, love, you and I are going to find out who was lying in those creels. Elliot found out about the newspaper at 7 from his mother, who placed it on the breakfast table between the coffee and the Tuesday lilies and let it speak for itself. You've seen it, Vivienne said. It was not a question. I've seen it. He had not touched the coffee. The lilies filled the room with their heavy funeral sweetness, and he thought, absurdly, of cardamom. Where did they get it? Does it matter? It matters to me. Look at the angle, Mother. That was taken from the water end of the pier, in the dark, at close range. That is not a photographer who wandered by. That is a photographer who was told. He set his hands flat on the table to keep them still. Someone knew I would be there. Someone knew before I did. How enterprising of them. Vivienne buttered a piece of toast with terrible calm. I have handled it. The lease on the bakery lapses in September. The Bell girl will be gone before the wedding is announced, the story will be a week old and forgotten, and the Lindvist arrangement will close on schedule. You will thank me for this in a year. He stood so fast the chair barked against the floor. You've put her out, over a photograph you didn't even take the trouble to trace. I've protected this family, as I have always protected this family. For the first time, her voice sharpened, and beneath the sharpness, briefly, he heard something almost tired. You think I enjoy being the villain of every story told below this hill? I do the necessary thing so that you may keep your soft opinions and your clean hands. That has been our arrangement since you were old enough to walk, Elliot. Do not develop a conscience 3 weeks before it becomes expensive. And if I told you, I don't want the marina, or the Lindvist girl, or any of it. Vivienne set down her knife. In the long window behind her the sea lay flat and bright and indifferent, and for a moment mother and son looked at each other across 33 years of arithmetic. Then you would be telling me you intend to trade the work of 4 generations, she said quietly, for 6 weeks and the smell of a bakery. I raised a cleverer man than that. Sit down. Drink your coffee. And do not go down that hill today, because if you are photographed within 100 yards of that shop before this blows over, I will not renew the lease in September. I will call the loan on Monday. The room went very still. The loan, Elliot said. The bakery carries a note against the building. It's held by the bank on the square, in which I am the principal depositor and to whose board I appoint 2 seats. She resumed her toast. The girl is behind on it. As a courtesy, no one has ever pressed. Courtesies, Elliot, can be withdrawn on a Monday morning as easily as they were extended. So, you will be discreet, and you will be dutiful, and the Bell girl will leave quietly with her dignity and a fair settlement. Or you will be reckless, and she will leave with nothing at all this month by order of a bank. Choose which kind of ruin you'd like to author. But choose it knowing the cost falls on her, not you. It always falls on the one with less. That is the only law this coast has ever really run on. She rose, kissed the air beside his cheek, and left him standing among the lilies with the newspaper and the flat bright sea and the full exact weight of what loving Nora Bell in the open would cost the woman he loved. Down the hill at the shop, the morning bread was in the ovens, and the town was thick outside the window, and Nora had just turned the sign to closed against the pointing when Bertie called sharply from the back. "Nora, come here. Come look at this." She was standing at the little cluttered desk where the deliveries were logged, holding the newspaper up to the window light, her glasses pushed high on her forehead, and her thumb pressed to the corner of the gray photograph. There, Bertie tapped the very edge of the print, past Nora, past Elliot, to the blurred, dark shore end of the pier where the lobster creels stacked in shadow. Right there, love in the corner of the picture. The photographer caught his own shadow on the boards, didn't mean to, the fool, the lantern was behind him. See the shape it throws? Nora took the paper in both hands and held it close, and there, faint as a watermark, thrown long across the pale boards by a swinging lantern, was the shadow of the one who had been crouched in the creels, a shadow with something square held up to its face, and below that, unmistakable, thrown clear on the wood, the long, thin, particular silhouette of a walking cane with a curved handle. Her blood went cold and quiet as the tide at its lowest turn. "Bertie," she whispered, "there's only one person in Marrow Cove who walks with a cane like that." And outside on the pavement, as if summoned, a slow-measured tap of wood on stone was coming up Harbor Street, through the muttering crowd, tap, 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 and stopping, quite deliberately, at the door of the Gull's Nest. The tapping stopped, and for the length of 3 slow breaths, nobody in the Gull's Nest moved. Then the latch lifted under a hand that knew it. Everyone in Marrow Cove knew the Gull's Nest latch stuck on the second push, and the door swung in against the little trembling bell, and old Silas Doran came into the shop out of the bright hard morning, with his cane in one hand and his cap in the other. And he could not lift his eyes off the floorboards. "Nora," he said, just her name. It came out of him, cracked down the middle. She stood behind the counter, with the newspaper still open in both hands, the shadow on the pale boards of the printed pier caught between her thumbs, and she looked at the cane. The long, thin ash cane, with the curved bone handle he'd carried since his hip gave out 3 winters back. The cane that had leaned against her counter 1,000 mornings while he took his coffee week and argued thee. Tides and the whole warm flowery room seemed to go very far away. "Take your coffee, Silas," she heard herself say. Her voice came out strange and level. "It's on. Weak as a rumor, the way you like it. Don't." He shut the door behind him. The heat and the salt came in with him, and under it the low-tide smell of a man who'd been on the water since 4. "Don't you be kind to me. Not this morning. I couldn't stand under it. Then tell me I'm wrong." She turned the paper around so the photograph faced him across the flour-dusted marble, and she laid one finger on the corner where the swinging lantern had thrown a long, thin shadow with a curved handle clear across the boards. "Tell me that isn't your cane in the picture, Silas. Tell me you weren't lying in the creels with a camera against your face while her throat closed. She pressed her lips flat and made it open again. "Tell me, and I'll believe you. I've believed you my whole life." Bertie had gone still by the ovens, with a tray half lifted, and she set it down without a sound. Silas looked at the picture. His jaw worked. He was 76 and brown as a nut, and he had carried Nora on his shoulders at the summer fair when she was small enough to fit there. And he had stood at the back of the church the day her aunt was laid to rest and wept into his cap where he thought no one could see. He did not look away from the shadow now. He made himself look at it, the way a man looks at a wound to know how deep. "I can't tell you that," he said. "God help me. I can't." The kettle ticked as it cooled. Somewhere out on the pavement the muttering crowd shifted, a bright, ordinary summer sound, gulls and voices and the slap of the tide against the sea-wall, and inside the little shop the air had gone thick as proving dough. "Why?" Nora said. It was not a shout. Bertie would say afterward that was the worst of it, that the girl didn't shout, only stood there straight in her flower-printed dress, with her aunt's iron in her spine, and asked the old man why in a voice as quiet as the tide turning. Silas's hand tightened on the bone handle until the knuckles went white as bread flour. "Sit me down, Bertie," he said. "My hip won't hold me through this, and I'll not tell it falling over." Bertie pulled the marble table's chair out, the same chair Elliot had sat stiff in on the first night, the chair where old men argued the moon, and Silas lowered himself into it with a grunt, both hands stacked on the cane, and the honeysuckle smell came pouring through the cracked window sweet and indifferent, while a man Nora had loved her whole life got ready to break her heart a second way. "You know what I owe," he said. "Everyone on this street knows what old Silas owes. The cottage, the boat. Both of them noted against the bank on the square, same as your buildings noted, same as half of Harbor Street. 22 years I've paid it. 22 years, on herring and mackerel and whatever the season gives, and I was near the end of it, Nora, near the last of it. 2 summers more, and the boat was mine clean." He turned his cap over in his lap. Then a fortnight back a man came to my slip. Soft-spoken. Good coat, city shoes, never saw sand in his life. Sat on my transom like he'd been invited, and he knew every figure I owed to the penny. What man? Nora's voice hadn't moved. He didn't leave a name. Left this. Silas reached into his coat with 2 fingers and drew out a card, cream-colored, sharp-cornered, gone soft at the edges from a fortnight against his chest, and he set it on the marble beside the newspaper as carefully as if it might sting. Told me my note could be forgiven. All of it. In one stroke, the boat mine tomorrow, if I did one small thing. His voice dropped. 1 photograph. The Ashford boy and the baker's girl, together, where a lens could see. That's all. He said it so gentle, Nora. He said it like a mercy. The gull Weathervane's shadow lay long across the floor between them. Nora did not pick up the card. She looked at it. "And you believed a stranger who knew your debt to the penny," she said, "was doing you a mercy. I believed what I wanted to believe, girl, same as any drowning man grabs the plank that floats." His old eyes came up at last, wet and unashamed of being wet. He told me the picture would never see print. Told me it was for the mother, for herself, up the hill, to show her son quiet, in her own parlor, and end the foolishness before it cost you your shop. He said, and I can hear him saying it, better the boy's mother sees one photograph in private than the whole coast sees a ruined girl in public. And I thought, his breath went ragged, I thought I was sparing you. I thought I was the one soul in this town clever enough to save you from yourself and the shop along with you. An old fool with a boat to keep, telling himself he was your guardian. That's the size of me, Nora. That's the whole shabby size of it. Silas. Bertie's voice came low and hard from the ovens. You sold her. Dress it how you like. You lay in the creels, and you sold our girl for a fishing boat. I know it. He did not flinch from Bertie the way no man flinched from Vivienne. He took it full in the chest. Don't you think I know it? I saw the front page through Deacon's bicycle basket at 5:30 this morning, and I have been sick with it since. It was never meant for print. He swore me that. And it's on the front of every paper from here to the county line, and the boy who swore me is nowhere. And I did that. Me, my hands. My cane in the corner of it, plain as a signature, because I'm too old and too lame to crouch clean in a stack of creels. He pressed the heel of one hand hard against his eyes. Your aunt would spit on me. And she'd be right to. For a long moment the only sound was the tide and the crowd and the small cooling tick of the kettle, and Nora stood over the man with the whole warm ruin of the morning pressing at her back. And she felt the anger in her go strange, not smaller, but wider, spilling past Silas toward the soft-spoken shape behind him. The good coat that had known his debt to the penny and had sat on his transom and called betrayal a mercy. You were used, Silas, she said at last, and the gentleness in it made the old man's face crumple worse than any blow. That doesn't wash your hands, but you were used, same as I was. A man doesn't come to a slip knowing another man's debt to the penny by luck. Somebody sent him. Somebody bought that card and your boat and that photograph, and it wasn't for me, and I don't think it was even for your mercy. She picked the card up then, finally, between two fingers, and turned it to the window light. Whose name is on this? Silas shook his head. No name. Only the firm. The card was near blank, a weight of cream stock that cost more than a day's baking, and in the center, in small sharp letters pressed deep, 3 words and nothing else. Frost Coastal Holdings. No number. No man. Just the name, and under it, small as a whisper, a single line, Acquisitions. Nora had never heard of it. She stood holding it in the flower light, and outside the crowd stirred again, and she did not yet understand what she was looking at. But she would remember, later, the exact weight of the little card in her fingers, heavier than paper had any right to be, and she would remember that the moment she read the name, some cold, clever part of her, the part that kept the ledger and knew to the penny what the shop owed and when, went very quiet and very still, the way the harbor goes quiet just before the weather turns. "Bertie," she said, "put the sign back to open and give Silas his coffee." Weak as a rumor. She set the card down on the marble, squared it with one finger until it lay parallel to the edge. Elliot's gesture. She realized as she did it, and hated that she'd caught it from him, and reached back to untie her apron a second time that morning. And then, when the crowd's had its look and gone, "One of you is going to tell me who in this town has ever heard the name Frost. Because I mean to know who bought me, and I mean to know it before herself calls that loan on Monday." Up the hill, in a house that smelled of lilies, Elliot Ashford was learning the name Frost from the other end. He had not gone down the hill. He had promised himself he would, all through the long, bright morning, and each time he reached for the door, his mother's voice came back to him, flat over the toast. "I will call the loan on Monday." And he stopped with his hand on the wood. Because he had done the arithmetic, and the arithmetic came out the same every way he turned it. If he went down, the note came due, and the cost fell on Nora, not on him. It always fell on the one with less. His mother had taught him that as a boy, and she had never once been wrong about it, which was the thing he could least forgive her. So instead, he did what he had been raised to do when a thing threatened the family. He went into the study, and he sat behind the desk his grandfather had sat behind, and he began to trace a photograph back to the hand that took it. He started with the paper. The editor was a client of the Grand's function rooms, and took his calls. The editor, sweating audibly down the line, swore the picture had come in over the transom the night of the gala. No photographer's name, no invoice, an envelope pushed under the office door before dawn, with a note that said only print it and a bank draft clipped behind, drawn to cover the paper's nerves twice over. A draft, Elliot said. Then it cleared through a bank. Whose, the editor did not want to say. Elliot let the silence do what silence did, the trick he'd learned from his mother. And after a while the editor said it, and Elliot wrote 3 words on the blotter in his flat, precise hand and looked at them a long time. Frost Coastal Holdings. He knew the name. That was the thing that turned the study cold around him, despite the summer pressing gold against the long windows. He knew it the way you know a name you've been trained since boyhood to watch for. Frost had come to his grandfather 20 years ago, wanting the frontage, and been sent away. Frost had come to Elliot himself 2 winters back. In a glass office, in a city where the sea was a thing you saw from a window, and made an offer for the whole of Harbor Street that Elliot had refused before the coffee cooled. Because you did not sell your own coast to a man who bought coastlines the way other men bought newspapers, quartered them, and sold the pieces back to the people who'd been born on them. And now Frost's name was on the draft that had printed a photograph of Elliot Ashford at the end of a moonlit pier. He sat with it, and slowly the shape of the thing rose up out of the water like a wreck at low tide, and he understood that he and Nora had never been the point of it at all. He rose and went to the window. Down the long green lawn, past the balustrade where Astrid had warned him, the marina lay bright and full, the Ashford slips and the Lindfist slips side by side, the 2 families' boats rocking on one tide, the whole valuable seam of the coast that his mother and Ingrid Lindfist meant to stitch into one holding with a wedding. One holding. Unbreakable, Frost could never touch it once it closed. Unless the wedding did not close. Unless, 3 weeks before the announcement, a scandal cracked the Ashford name down the middle and set the 2 proud mothers at each other's throats over whose son, whose daughter, whose fault, and the merger curdled, and the frontage came loose on the market, cheap and quarrelsome and ripe. And a soft-spoken man in a good coat was waiting under it with his hands open. "You clever devil," Elliot said to the empty study, and it was almost admiration, and it made him ill. He found his mother in the morning room with the second post and a cup of tea gone cold at her elbow. She did not look up. "You've been on the telephone all morning," Vivienne said. "The staff tell me." "Zurich again?" Frost. He set the card down. He'd had one of his own, 2 winters old, in a drawer, on the table beside her cold tea, squared to the edge, and watched the name land on her the way a stone lands in still water. Her face did not move. But her hand, lifting the teacup, stopped in the air a half-second too long, and Elliot had spent 33 years learning to read that woman in the half-seconds. "He's had a man in Marrow Cove for a fortnight, Mother. He paid to have that photograph taken. He paid the paper to print it. He did not do it to ruin a baker. He did it to ruin us, to break the Lindvist arrangement before it closes and take the coast out of the wreck. You have spent all morning doing his work for him. You put the girl out of her shop, and you handed him exactly the quarrel he paid for." Vivienne set the cup down without drinking. For the first time in his memory his mother looked, briefly, every one of her years. "How much did he offer you?" she said quietly. 2 winters ago. When you flew to see him and told me it was the pension fund." Elliot did not answer that. She had known then, of course she had known. She always knew. "Enough to buy the coast," he said. "Twice over. I told him no. I have never told you that. I'm telling you now because I want you to understand that I have refused this man once already, at a table where no one was watching, and I meant it, and I will not let you finish for him, out of pride, the thing I refused him at cost. He put both hands flat on the table, his grandfather's steadiness, his mother's iron. Don't call the loan. Whatever else we are to each other this month, Mother, don't you dare call that loan. Vivienne looked at her son a long moment, and the sea lay flat and bright behind her, and something went across her face that was not softness. Vivienne did not do softness, but was, perhaps, the private, expensive recalculation of a woman who has just seen the board turned and every piece stand in a different light. "Sit down, Elliot," she said, "and tell me everything the editor told you. From the beginning. Leave nothing out." She drew the cold tea toward her and did not drink it. "If a man has spent a fortnight and a fortune to make me his instrument, I should like, at the very least, to be a poor one." The heat broke that afternoon into a low silver haze off the water, the kind of summer light that flattened the sea to pewter and laid a damp on everything. And it was in that heavy quiet, the shop shut, the crowd gone home to its suppers, the last look taken and traded, that Elliot came down the hill after all. He did not come to the front. He came the low road, along the sea-wall, the way Nora had gone the night of the gala, and he knocked at the back door of the Gull's Nest, where the delivery crates stacked, and the honeysuckle had gone rampant over the fence. And when she opened it, the warm cardamom dark of the shop breathed out around them both, and neither of them could think, for a moment, of a single word. "You shouldn't be here," Nora said. "There'll be a man from a paper behind every creel on this coast tonight. Let them lie in the creels. It's crowded work. I hear the last man got a photograph and a great deal of trouble for it." He said it dry, and she almost laughed, and hated that she almost laughed, standing in the ruin of the day with the low-tide smell coming up off the flats. "Nora, it was Frost. The photograph. A developer. He's wanted this coast for 20 years. He paid a man to take it and paid the paper to print it, and it was never about you or me. We were the cheapest way to break a merger. I've spent the day proving it, and I can prove it again in front of anyone who matters. I know about Frost," she said. That stopped him. How? Because the man who lay in the creels sat in that chair this morning and wept into his cap. She stepped back and let him in, because the light was going, and a man of his face on her back step was its own kind of front page. Silas Doran. My aunt's oldest friend. He carried me on his shoulders at the fair when I was small. He held me up at her funeral. Her voice did the level thing again, the thing that cost her everything. Frost's man came to his slip and bought his debt and his boat and his shame, and told him it was a mercy, and Silas, who has loved me my whole life, believed it, because he was drowning, and a drowning man believes the plank. She set the cream card on the marble between them. "So, you bring me your half of it, and I've had mine since dawn, and now we both know the whole shape of the thing. And it doesn't matter, Elliot. That's the part you walk down the hill, not understanding. It doesn't change one thing that matters. It changes everything. It's not a scandal. It's a scheme. And once I lay it in front of the Lindevists—" "And what do you tell them?" She rounded on him, and the anger she hadn't spent on Silas she spent now, low and fierce as Bertie. That the kiss was a lie? It wasn't. That you didn't mean it? You did. You'll go up that hill and stand in front of your mother and Astrid's mother and the county men, and you'll prove that Frost paid for the photograph. And every soul on that lawn will nod and say what a clever, wicked man he is. And then they'll say, quietly, over the drinks, but the boy did kiss the baker, didn't he? That part Frost didn't invent. Frost only sold what was already true. Her breath caught. You can clear the merger. You cannot clear me. There is no photograph a man can pay for that unmakes the one that's already printed. and no proof of who took it that puts me back behind that counter as anything but the baker the Ashford boy got photographed kissing. That's who I am on this coast now. Frost didn't do that. We did. The haze pressed silver at the window. Out on the flats, a curlew called, thin and falling, and the honeysuckle poured its sweetness in over the smell of low tide. And Elliot stood in the closing bakery he had come to feel was the only honest room he knew, and had no arithmetic for what she'd said, because it did not come out the same any way he turned it. "Then let it be true," he said. "Elliot, let it be true." He crossed the small warm dark to her, and his hand came up as if to touch her face and stopped, a breath away, the near thing hanging between them in the cardamom air. "I have spent my whole life proving things false, proving the count was short, proving the frontage would earn, proving I was the man my mother needed me to be, whatever man that unmade underneath. I am tired unto my bones of proving things false, Nora. Here is one thing I would like, for once, to prove true. In front of every soul on that lawn, and every man in every creel." His voice dropped to almost nothing, the way it had on the pier. "I kissed the baker. Print it. I'll say it into any camera Frost cares to buy. Let that be the true thing they can't unmake." Her heart was going like a bird against glass. She wanted to lean the half-breath forward into his hand. She wanted, at the very same time, to shove him out the back door and up the seawall and never let him near the shop again, because she could see with terrible clarity what his one true thing would cost, not him, her, and she loved him too much, she understood in that flattened silver moment, to let him pay for his conscience with her ruin. "No," she whispered, and it was the word he'd asked her for on the pier, come 3 weeks too late and about the wrong thing. "You don't get to be brave with my shop, Elliot. You don't get to buy your one true thing with a building your mother can take on a Monday morning. Go home. Break your merger, save your coast, be the good man, but do it up the hill where it belongs to you. And leave me the one thing that's still mine to lose." He lowered his hand. It was the right thing, and it felt again like a small door closing, and this time she heard the latch of it go all the way home. "I'll stop the loan," he said. "Whatever else. My mother's agreed to hold it. You have that, at least, from today. Your mother's agreed." Nora almost smiled, and it was a tired, wrung-out thing. For how long, do you think, does a woman like that agree to a thing that costs her, when the man who taught her the coast runs only on who has less, is waiting under the wreck? She opened the back door onto the silver evening. "Go home, Elliot, and thank you, truly, for walking down the hill to tell me a thing I already knew. It's the most anyone up there's ever done." He went. She stood in the doorway, with the low tide breathing on the flats, and watched him take the seawall in the falling light, and she pressed her thumb once across her own knuckles where his had been, and then she shut the door. She did not sleep that night either. But this time it was not grief that kept her down among the cold ovens at 4 a.m. It was the ledger. She took it out from under the bag of sugar, and she opened it flat on the marble, and she read it the way she had never once let herself read it, not as a debt to be survived, but as a map. The note against the building. The freeholder that was a company. The company Vivienne owned a great deal of. The bank on the square, where Vivienne was principal depositor and appointed 2 seats, and now, laid over all of it like a second tide chart, the name on the little cream card, Frost Coastal Holdings. Acquisitions. A man who had wanted this coast for 20 years, and had just spent a fortune to shake it loose, and who could not have known Nora's cold, clever, quiet part turned this over and over in the blue dark, could not possibly have known Silas's debt to the penny. or the paper's editor, or which envelope under which door before which dawn, unless someone already inside the running of this coast had drawn him the chart. Somebody local, Bertie had said over the peaches, over the shadow in the print. Somebody was down at the water, close, waiting. Somebody knew you'd be there before you did. Nora sat very still in the cold and the cardamom ghost, and let herself, for the first time, follow the thought all the way to the bottom of the harbor. Frost was the good coat. Frost was the money. But Frost was a man in a city where the sea was a thing seen from a window, and a man like that did not know which old fisherman was 2 summers from a clean boat, or which night a promised heir would walk to the dark end of a marina pier, or which paper would print before dawn. A man like that bought a chart. And there was only a small handful of people on this whole coast who could have drawn it, who knew the debts and the leases and the arrangements, and exactly where the guarded Ashford boy went in the evenings when he told his mother he was working. She thought of the gala. The lanterns. Vivienne on the balustrade with the harbour master and 2 men from the county planning office, redrawing the coast in one colour with the tilt of her head. She thought of Astrid, luminous and clever and kind, saying, "I don't want the marriage either. I want the marina," saying, "Fix it tonight," as if she'd known already that there would be something to fix. She thought, and here the cold, clever part of her went so quiet it frightened her, of who on all this coast had most wanted the Ashford-Lindquist merger not to close. By the time the gulls came awake and the first grey came up off the water, Nora Bell had lit the ovens by feel and measured the flour into the dented tin bowl without weighing it, and she was not humming the fridge song. She was not humming at all. She was folding an apron over her arm and setting the cream cards square in her pocket, and looking up the hill toward the white columns with her aunt's iron gone all the way through her, because she had understood, somewhere in the blue small hours, that she was done waiting to learn who had bought her. She was going up the hill to ask them. All of them. At once, to their faces, on their own lawn, with the shadow print in one hand and Silas's card in the other, not the baker who got photographed, but the woman who kept the only honest ledger on the coast, come to read the account aloud. "Bertie," she said, when the old woman came in stamping the damp off her boots at 5, "mind the ovens today. And if a man from any paper asks where I've gone, tell him the truth for once. Tell him the baker's girl went up to the Grand to settle a bill." Bertie looked at her a long moment over the rims of her glasses, and whatever she saw there made her set down her coat and stand up very straight, small and knotted and fierce as a piece of driftwood that had outlasted 40 winters of weather. "Your aunt," Bertie said, "would be on fire with pride, and half sick with fear, and she'd not stop you for the world." She reached out and squared the collar of Nora's dress with one knotted hand, the way you'd ready someone for church or for war. "Go on then, love, go read them their account. But mind," and here the old voice dropped, and the wry went out of it entirely, "you're walking up that hill with proof that the one man who could draw Frost his chart sleeps under that very roof. And they don't hang a picture of that on a front page. They make it disappear. So you keep to the open lawn, and you keep your voice level the way you did with herself, and whatever they offer you to be quiet. And they will offer, love, they always offer. You remember, it's the offer that tells you you were right." Nora put the card in her pocket and the folded newspaper under her arm, and she stepped out the back of the gull's nest into the pale summer morning, with the whole sleeping town below her and the white columns bright above. And she started up the hill toward the light before the fog had even finished burning off the water, not yet knowing which of them she'd find waiting at the top, nor which of the smooth, kind faces on that lawn had drawn a soft-spoken stranger, the exact chart of her ruin. Only certain, at last, that by the time the gulls settled, she meant to be looking straight into it. The fog had not finished burning off the water when Nora reached the top of the hill, and the Grand's great lawns lay under it silver and wet, the lanterns from the night before still strung between the poles and gone grey now, drooping with dew. Waiters in shirt-sleeves were folding the long linen tables. The band's platform stood empty, a chair tipped on its side where someone had left it. The whole party had the stranded look of a tide gone out, and the marble columns rose white and dripping into the haze, and the smell of last night's crushed grass and spilled champagne came up warm and sour off the ground as Nora walked across it in her flower-printed dress, with her thumb pressed to the card in her pocket. Vivienne Ashford stood on the terrace above the lawn in grey silk, a cup of black coffee going cold in her hand, watching two men from the county planning office pace off the frontage with a surveyor's wheel that ticked as it turned. She saw Nora come up out of the mist, and she did not move, and she did not send anyone down to turn her away. She only watched, the way a woman watches weather she has decided not to come indoors for. "You were told to be gone before the season ends," Vivienne said, when Nora had climbed the terrace steps. "It is not yet the end of the season. You are early, Miss Bell, and you are on private grass. I'm here to settle a bill." Nora's voice was level. Her heart was not, but her voice was, and she had learned that trick from the woman in front of her. "You said I never fed you. I've come to read you the account, all of it, out loud on your own lawn where the county men can hear." Astrid Lindvist was already on the terrace, in yesterday's pale gold linen with a wrap thrown over it against the damp, a cup in her own hand, and she looked at Nora with an interest that was not unkind and did not trouble to hide itself. "Well," Astrid said, into the cold morning, "here is the baker come to breakfast, and nobody's dressed for it. Mother will be sorry she missed it. She does love a scene, provided she wrote it herself." She set her cup down on the balustrade. "Go on, then. I've been up all night watching two mothers redraw a coastline. I could use a different story." Astrid, Vivienne did not turn her head. "I'm only saying she walked up the hill, Vivienne. Nobody walks up this hill." Astrid's dry mouth flattened, which usually means the thing they've come to say is worth the climb. Down on the lawn the surveyor's wheel ticked and stopped. The county men had turned to watch, and into that wet silver quiet, from the wide glass doors of the morning room, came a man Nora knew by sight, the way she knew every face that had ever leaned on her counter. Not a guest, not family, but the one who ran the Ashford accounts, who paid the Grand's ledgers and carried the keys to the estate office, and had sat at the back of every Harbour Street meeting for 20 years, with a soft pencil and a softer voice. Gideon Marsh, the family's man of business. He came out onto the terrace smoothing his cuff, and his eyes went to Nora, and then to the folded newspaper under her arm, and something in the smooth of his face went very still. "Mrs. Ashford," Marsh said, gentle as a man closing a drawer, "shall I have someone see Miss Bell down to the road?" This is a distressing morning for everyone. She oughtn't be troubled with it, and neither ought you. "I'm not troubled, Miss Marsh." Nora looked at him, and she did not yet know what she knew, but the cold, clever ledger-keeping part of her had gone quiet again, the way the harbour went quiet before the weather turned. "Let me read my account first. Then I'll see myself down. I know the low road. I've had years of practice." She unfolded the newspaper on the balustrade over the beaded dew, and she smoothed the grey photograph flat with the side of her hand, and the whole terrace leaned toward it despite itself, the heir and the baker's girl, the lanterns smearing gold, the moonlit pier. Then she laid one finger on the corner past the two figures, down at the dark shore end where the creels stacked in shadow, and she pressed it there. "There," she said. "That's the account. Not the kiss. Everyone's read the kiss." This, her finger held the corner. The photographer caught his own shadow on the boards. A lantern was behind him, and he never thought to look. See the shape? A man crouched low, a camera to his face, and thrown clear across the wood beside him, a walking cane with a curved handle. There is one cane like that in Marrow Cove, and it belongs to a fisherman named Silas Doran, who is 76 and lame in the hip and has loved me since before I could walk. Vivienne set down her cold coffee. She looked at the shadow a long moment, and the county men had come 3 steps up the lawn to see, and Astrid had gone very quiet. "An old man took a photograph," Vivienne said. "For money. This is squalid, Miss Bell, but it is not news. The poor sell what they have. It is generally the only thing the arrangement leaves them. Silas didn't have a photograph to sell until somebody bought him one." Nora reached into her pocket and set the cream card on the newspaper. Squared to the edge, deliberate, a man came to his slip a fortnight ago. Good coat. City shoes. Knew Silas's debt to the bank on the square to the penny, the note against his cottage and his boat, 22 years of herring and mackerel, 2 summers from clean. This man offered to forgive all of it, in one stroke, for one photograph of your son and the baker. He left no name. He left this. Marsh did not look at the card. That was the first thing. Every soul on the terrace looked at the card, the county men craning, Astrid leaning in, Vivienne's eyes dropping to it, and Gideon Marsh looked instead at Nora's face, steady, the way a man watches the one door in a burning room. Frost Coastal Holdings, Vivienne read aloud, and her voice thinned. Acquisitions, my son traced the same name this morning, she went on, half to herself now. To a bank draft that paid a newspaper to print. A developer who has wanted this coast for 20 years, breaking a merger before it closes so the frontage comes loose cheap. She lifted her eyes to Nora, and for the first time there was no distaste in them, only the swift cold arithmetic of a woman seeing the board turned. "You have brought me the shape of my own ruin, Miss Bell, laid out on a newspaper. Why? I put you out of your shop yesterday. Why climb the hill to warn the woman who did it?" "Because I don't think Frost drew his own chart," Nora said. The surveyor's wheel had stopped ticking. Out beyond the lawn a gull complained at the haze, and the marina below lay flat and pewter. The Ashford slips, and the Lindfist slips rocking side by side on one grey tide. "A man in a city where the sea is a thing seen from a window," Nora said, slowly, the way she counted out a difficult sum for a customer who'd argue it, "does not know which old fisherman is 2 summers from a clean boat. He does not know which night a guarded man will walk to the dark end of a pier. He does not know which editor prints before dawn, or which door to push an envelope under. Frost had the money. Frost did not have the map. Somebody on this coast, somebody who knew the debts, and the leases, and the arrangements, and exactly where your son goes in the evenings when he tells you he's working, somebody drew the stranger his chart. And there are very few people who could." "This is a great deal of guessing," Marsh said gently, "from a woman who bakes." And there it was. Nora turned to him, and she kept her voice level, and she felt the harbor quiet go all the way down. "I never said the fisherman's name to anyone up this hill, Miss Marsh." The terrace went still as a held breath. "You called him an old man a moment ago," Nora said, "and Mrs. Ashford called him an old man, and the picture only shows a cane and a shadow. But when I said a man had bought him, you didn't ask who. You've known who since 5:30 this morning, same as the rest of the coast, because you read the front page. But you knew before that, didn't you? You knew which slip. You knew the note came to 22 years because you administer that bank on Mrs. Ashford's behalf, and you know every debt on Harbor Street to the penny. And there is no soul alive who knows my ledger and Silas's ledger and this family's calendar, all three, except the man who keeps them. Mrs. Ashford. Marsh turned to Vivienne, and his voice was still soft, but a thread had gone tight in it. You will not stand here and let a shopgirl accuse your steward of 20 years on the strength of a shadow and a slip of the tongue. I have served this house since before your son could read a balance sheet. I have covered your accounts through 3 bad winters. I will not be spoken to across a newspaper by. Then tell them I'm wrong, Nora said, echoing herself in the dawn, echoing the words she'd laid on Silas over the marble hours ago. Tell me you didn't sit with a soft-spoken man from Frost and give him Silas's figures and my calendar and your own master's son's evening habits. Tell me, and I'll listen. I listened to a man I've loved my whole life say it this morning, and it near broke me. I can listen to you. Marsh's mouth opened, and no denial came out of it fast enough. And into that half-second's gap Vivienne Ashford turned her full gray attention on the man who had kept her books for 20 years, and Nora watched a terrible cold recognition move across her face. Gideon. Vivienne's voice was very quiet. 3 weeks ago you advised me to press the Bell lease. You brought me the file yourself. You said the frontage would earn better cleared. I thought it good counsel. She set the file of her own memory down between them like evidence. And the night of the gala, when my son disappeared for 40 minutes, it was you who told the room he was on a call to Zurich. You knew he was not on the lawn. You knew where he had gone. Nobody told you. You knew. I keep this family's affairs, Marsh said. It is my work to know. It is your work to know for me. Vivienne took one step toward him, and the pearls at her throat did not so much as tremble, and her softness was more frightening than any shout. Not for a man in a glass office who has wanted my coast for 20 years. How much, Gideon? What did Frost promise you that 30 years of my wages did not? And Gideon Marsh, who had stood behind the Ashfords at the back of every room with a soft pencil, who had watched other men's fortunes pass through his hands into other men's names for the whole length of his gone gray life, broke at last, not loudly, the way the ruined break in the town's imagination, but quietly, the way a ledger closes. A directorship, he said, a stake, my name on a deed for once, instead of under someone else's. His soft voice cracked down the middle, and Nora heard in it, unwillingly, the same drowning note she'd heard in Silas's over the marble. Frost was going to take the coast, whatever I did. I made sure that when it came loose, one honest servant caught a piece of it before it fell into the water. 30 years, Vivienne, I have banked your name and buried mine. I wanted, one time before the end of it, to own a thing instead of counting it. So, you sold the boy who trusted you, Astrid said, and there was no dryness left in her now, only a cold, clean disgust, and an old man's boat, and a girl's whole life for a plate with your name on it. She looked at him as if he were something washed up. Frost didn't even need to buy the coast, in the end. He only had to find the one man on it who felt owed. Down on the lawn the county planning men had stopped pretending not to listen. The surveyor stood, with his ticking wheel forgotten, in his hands. And Vivienne Ashford drew herself up in her grey silk, with the whole flat bright sea behind her, and she did the arithmetic one last time. And Nora watched her arrive at a sum that cost her, and pay it anyway. You will be gone from this house by noon, Vivienne told Marsh, with the clothes you came in and not one paper more. My son will trace every draft you touched and every word you carried to Frost, and I will put the whole of it, your name, the fisherman's card, this photograph, and the shadow in its corner. in front of the county board and the Lindvists both this afternoon, so that no man on this coast can ever again say the Ashfords broke faith. Frost bought a scandal, Gideon. I intend to hand him a scheme with his own instrument's name on it. You have made me, at the very least, an honest villain again. Go. Marsh stood a moment in the wet gray light, the smooth all gone out of his face. Then he went, back through the glass doors he had come out of, and a footman moved quietly to follow him, and it was the softest ruin Nora had ever watched, and somehow the completest. The surveyor's wheel began, uncertainly, to tick again, and then stopped for good. It was into that emptied quiet that Elliot came, at a near run across the wet lawn from the Marina Road. His collar open and grass on his shoes, and he took the terrace steps 2 at a time and stopped dead at the sight of her, Nora Bell in her flower-printed dress on his mother's terrace, the newspaper flat on the balustrade between them all. "You went up the hill," he said. "Alone. Bertie wouldn't tell me which road you'd." He stopped. He looked at his mother, at Ashford, at the cream cards squared on the newspaper, and the whole shape of what he'd walked into landed on him at once. "Marsh," he said. "It was Marsh." "Your baker read us the account," Vivian said. "The whole of it. She was better at it than any man I employ, which is, I begin to think, rather the point." She lifted her chin. "Go on, then, Elliot. You have been walking down that hill for 3 weeks. There is no one left on this terrace who does not already know why. You need not do sums for me any more." Elliot looked at his mother for a long moment, 33 years of arithmetic passing wordless between them, and then he crossed the wet terrace to Nora and stopped a breath away. The near thing hanging between them the way it had in the cardamom dark. "I came to stop you paying for my conscience," he said, low, "and you've gone and settled the whole bill without me." "You people," Nora said, and her voice wasn't level anymore. It was going like a bird against glass. "You'd let a woman climb a hill alone to do the one brave thing and then arrive to carry the empty basket back down." "Nora." He didn't touch her. His hand came up and stopped, the old, careful half-inch. "Yesterday, you told me I don't get to be brave with your shop. You were right, so I'm going to be brave with mine." He turned his head, not away from her, toward the terrace, toward his mother and Astrid, and the county men on the grass, and the whole gray, listening morning. "There's no camera in the creels now. Let there be one." I kissed the baker. "I'd do it again on this terrace in front of the county board. Not because a developer paid for a photograph, because it's the truest thing I've done in 33 years. And I am finished proving true things false to keep a coast in one color." "Elliot," Astrid said, and the dryness came back into her, gentle now, almost fond. "For heaven's sake, you don't have to marry the Marina to save it. My mother wants the frontage protected from frost, and your mother's about to hand the county a scheme with Frost's own steward's name on it. 2 families defending one coast makes a far better story than 2 families welded by a wedding neither the bride nor the groom wanted." She picked up her cup. "Go and be true somewhere warmer. I'll manage the mothers. I've been managing them since we were throwing shells off my father's dock." Vivienne said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at Nora, the flower-printed dress, the level voice, the ledger read aloud on her own grass, and something moved behind the cold that was not warmth, but was, perhaps, respect finally arrived too late to pretend it wasn't. "The loan will not be called," Vivienne said. "Not Monday, not ever. The lease on the Gull's Nest will be renewed in September, on fair terms, in your own name, Miss Bell, because a woman who will climb this hill to read me my account to my face is precisely the sort of frontage a well-run town should be ashamed to lose." She turned to go, then paused, one gloved hand on the terrace rail. "You said I bought your bread and paid the bill, and never fed you. You were right. It is not a thing anyone has said to me in 30 years and lived on my grass to finish the sentence. The ghost of something crossed her face. Send up the morning rolls tomorrow. 200. I find I have got used to them. And she went in, straight-backed, into the house that smelled of lilies. And Astrid followed with her cup, throwing Nora one last dry, unreadable glance over her shoulder, and the county men gathered their wheel and their papers and drifted down the lawn, and all at once there was only Nora and Elliot on the wet grey terrace, with the sea flat and bright below them. "Well," Elliot said. "Unsteady. Now tell me to go." Nora looked up at him in the burning-off haze, the honeysuckle from some far garden coming faint on the wind, the lanterns dripping grey on their wires, and she thought of the pier and the words she hadn't said, and the word she'd said too late about the wrong thing, and she did not tell him to go. "No," she said. "I don't think I will." She leaned the half-breath forward, and his hand finished its long interrupted arc, and came to rest along her jaw, warm and certain. And she felt his thumb move once across her cheekbone, the way it had moved a quarter turn across a teacup on the first honest night of the summer. And this time no camera clicked, and no creel scraped stone. And there was nothing to change everything, because everything, at last, had already changed. "I love you," Elliot said against her hair, and it was the one declaration, and he'd earned it, and he said it plainly the way a plain-spoken town said its truest things. "I have been down that hill 100 mornings telling myself it was for the tea." "It was never the tea," Nora said. "It was the cardamom. Everyone knows that. Ask the widow Astor." And she felt him laugh, the guarded man, laughing low and surprised into her hair on his mother's terrace, and she thought it was the best sound she had heard in a summer full of terrible ones. The season did not break her clean in half after all. By the time the honeysuckle went brown on the marina fence and the first cool edge came into the September mornings, the gull's nest still sat crooked at the elbow of Harbor Street, blue paint peeling at the sills, the gull weather vane still pointing everywhere but true north, and the new lease, in Nora Bell's own name, was framed on the wall behind the counter where the bank's letters used to be shoved under a bag of sugar. Frost Coastal Holdings withdrew from the coast entirely by August. It is difficult to quarter a merger for profit when both families you meant to split have stood together in front of the county board, and named your instrument and read your own scheme aloud from a newspaper with a shadow in the corner. A man who buys coastlines the way other men buy newspapers had, at last, met a baker who kept the only honest ledger on the water, and he did not come back. Silas Doran did not lose his boat. That was Nora's doing, and she never once called it forgiveness, because she was her aunt's daughter, flour and iron both, and iron does not forgive easily. But she went down to his slip one grey morning with 2 warm rolls in a paper bag. And she set them on his transom where the soft-spoken man had sat, and she said, "You were used, Silas, that doesn't wash your hands. But there's bread, and there's a stool at my counter, and there's a whole town that'll forget faster if you're seen taking your coffee week as a roomer every morning like you always did." And the old man wept into his cap, and he came, and he argued the tides with Mr. Sark, Pell and the widow Astor again by the first week of autumn, and if he leaned his cane against the counter a little more carefully now, a little more ashamed of it, only Nora ever noticed, and she never said. Bertie put it best, the way Bertie always did, on the morning Elliot Ashford came in through the front door at 10 to 8, not to count rolls, but to steal one, still warm enough to fog the paper, and kissed the baker over the counter in full view of the fishermen and the summer renters and the widow Astor's scandalized delight. "Well," said Bertie, 70 if she was a day, small and knotted and fierce as driftwood, watching the heir of the grand burn his fingers on a roll he'd taken without asking. "There's a man who's finally figured out what he was short." "And what's that?" Nora said. This, Bertie waved one flower-white hand at the whole crooked warm room, the ovens, the ledger no longer hidden, the gull weathervane's shadow long across the floor, the 2 cups on the little marble table where old men argued the moon. The thing money can't be short of. Because it was never for sale. Your aunt knew it. Cost her a fortune being right about it. But she died, Bertie caught herself, and smiled, and finished gentle. She went to her rest, knowing this shop fed more of this town than the whole White House on the bluff ever did. And now here's the bluff come down the hill for its breakfast, hat in hand. She turned back to her tray. Took him long enough. They always take too long, the ones who iron their own sadness. Nora Bell unlocked the gull's nest at 5 the next morning, the way her aunt had taught her, the way she always would. The fog came in off the water, soft as spilled milk. She lit the ovens by feel. She measured flour into the dented tin bowl without weighing it, because her hands already knew. And when the first gold burned off the haze, and the whole town below began to wake, the fisherman, the nurse off the night shift, the man from the bluff coming down the hill to argue the tides, she found she was humming 3 notes, low and warm over the proving rolls. Not the fridge song, not the funeral march, just a summer held safe at last. And a shop that would still be standing when the next one came. Because a summer romance is only a season, and a stolen kiss is only a moment, and a scandal is only ever as strong as the lie underneath it. But the truth read aloud on an open lawn, in a level voice, by the woman everyone underestimated, that changes everything, and it stays changed, and it smells, if you're lucky, like cardamom and warm dough at 5 in the morning. If this story warmed you the way a kitchen warms at first light, stay a while with us. Subscribe to Adrian Romance Stories and let the next one find you when the fog rolls in.